Yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Maria. I'm the digital coordinator at the College of Psychic Studies. And thank you so much for being here for tonight's talk with the Order of the Sun and Moon. So the Order of the Sun and Moon are Kate Southworth, Greg Humphreys, and Julian Vane. And as I mentioned, their artwork will be on display at the college from next Friday. That's Friday, the 30th of August until Friday, the 27th of September. And they're here tonight to share their backstory as artists and occult practitioners, as well as offering us a glimpse of what we can expect from this exhibition. So I'm going to keep my introduction brief because, like I said, there's probably a lot to get through. And if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat at any point. We'll be getting to them at the end, okay? And for now, I'll hand it over to Greg, who's going to be speaking first. So go ahead, Greg.
Great. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? So my name's Greg Humphreys. So I'm an artist. I'm living down in Cornwall in the UK, probably about as far south as you can get. So it's on the edge of the Lizard Peninsula, which is like right down at the bottom. And so what we're going to do is we've got this show coming up at the College of Psychic Studies. We've also got a show coming up in St. Ives in the early part of next year to coincide with a show at Tate St. Ives of Ithell Colquhoun. So Ithell Colquhoun plays quite a large part in our story. And so I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation, and then you probably won't be seeing much of me, but hopefully I can sort of give you a bit of background about what the Order of the Sun and Moon is, why we set it up, and then launching into a bit of theory about what my practice is and how I've ended up doing the work that you're going to see at the College of Psychic Studies. And I'll show you a few examples of that, obviously. Okay, here we go. So let's get the PowerPoint presentation started. I am going to start screen sharing. Okay, just checking that's all good with everyone. Everybody can see the PowerPoint there. Okay, so yeah, so Greg Humphreys, if you need to get in touch with me, there's a couple of places you can get in touch and see previous work and that sort of thing. I'll put that on at the end as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch via Instagram or sort of via email and stuff, they can do that. Okay, so Order of the Sun and Moon. So it all started where I was looking and researching Ithell Colquhoun for some work for Tate St. Ives. I was doing some work for Tate St. Ives with somebody called Emma Sharples, and I was looking at Ithell Colquhoun, who's sort of, I don't know if people are familiar with Ithell Colquhoun's work, but she was an occultist and an artist from sort of the early part of the 20th century all the way through till about late 70s, early 80s. And she wrote an essay about in the late 1940s where she was recounting a dream that she'd had. And in this dream, what she said was she called it the Order of the Sun and Moon Nicaragua, because in this dream, that's what it'd been said that she should call it. And so she called it this thing and wrote a piece of prose poetry about it. And it was called the Order of the Sun and Moon because she went into this grotto in this dream, which is where the Order of the Sun and Moon met. And she said that this place was in Nicaragua. Now, it's interesting for me, that idea that it's in Nicaragua, because it's this idea, I think there's in alchemical practice, there's this idea of India, and it's like it's another world, it's like it's another country, it's an exotic location, it's somewhere different. So for me, this grotto of the Sun and Moon that she dreamt about in Nicaragua is about it being in a different place to the place where she was living. She was living in South Cornwall and at the time. And one particular sentence, the sentence that's on the screen, really stood out for me, where she said that, and now if I receive an idea or perception which does not seem to be a direct result of anything I've read, heard, or thought, I take it to be a message from the Order, like the Order of the Sun and Moon. And so from my point of view, I just thought, oh, that's just such a gift. That's such a nice thing to have. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be great to sort of set something up which was like this Order of the Sun and Moon that's available for everybody to tap into? It's not an exclusive thing, but it's just like this idea of something sort of amorphous that has got, it's not that Kate, Julian and myself are the Order of the Sun and Moon. It's that we work for the Order of the Sun and Moon. It's like we don't know who the Order of the Sun and Moon is. So I really like that idea. So the work that we've set up for this exhibition is inspired by Ithell Colquhoun and inspired by this idea of the Order of the Sun and Moon. So please don't think that it's us three and that we're trying to say that we're the Order of the Sun and Moon. It's not that at all. Okay. So Ithell Colquhoun, really interested in surrealism. So she was part of the surrealist group. She met up with Breton and people like that in Paris in the 20s. Came back to the UK, was part of the London surrealist group in the 20s. And then what I really like about this is that I'm going to sort of paraphrase and probably badly represent this, but I always like to say that she left the surrealist group because she was too weird. And she was sort of part of, they started to have these rules where you couldn't be a member, sorry, of a secret society or an order. And she was interested in these occult groups. And so to be part of the surrealist group, she couldn't be also a member of these occult groups. So she left. And she sort of left them to it. And so she started to get interested in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And particularly, she was interested in the Kabbalah, and she was interested in the Kabbalah as a map between this world and the other world. Okay. And so she was really interested in, and the whole idea of the initiatory system of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was that you meditate on each of the sephira, which are like the circles for anybody who's not familiar with the Kabbalah, and also the paths in between. And so she sort of tried to join the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but was sort of rejected. And it was also towards the end of the sort of Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in its sort of first phase. So it was a bit messy, but she still went through that initiatory system. So she still did the meditations. She went through looking at each sephira, each path, meditating on them. And what she was really interested in, this idea of color. So I think I'm right in saying that she was part of, in the 20s, she was part of the atelier for Amédée Ozenfant in Paris, who was part of the abstract movement of abstraction. And obviously this idea of color in abstraction, as in color can be a thing that represents not just a color, but it can affect, your mood, your emotional state, and it can also have a spiritual presence or an energy associated with each color. So she was really interested in that. And so what she did was, with these key scales of color, was that she started to sort of really study them. And now I'm going to go through like a little example in a second of what the key scales of color are, just for people so that you can sort of understand not only Ithell Colquhoun's work, but also my work. So when you come to look at my work, you'll understand it more, hopefully, if I go through a little example. So, for example, if we're looking at, this is from Crowley's Book of Thoth, by the way. So I've got to give him a mention, because otherwise I'll get into this all sorts of ancestral trouble. So yeah, so this is from Crowley's Book of Thoth. So let's take an example of this. So if you look down to card number 18, the moon, if you look all the way across that line there, and it says key scale right at the end, and the key scale is number 29. Okay, so key scale 29 is for the moon. So if we then look at another tape, so it's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, yeah? So obviously they're all into tables, they're into sort of associations of things with different, the moon is all these things, and you meditate on each one, and then you understand the moon more. So number 29, I'm not going to go through what each of the scales are. If you're really interested, obviously you can study the Kabbalah and then you'll understand. But essentially what we have is we have 4 colors that are associated with the key scale number 29. So we have the night scale gives us crimson ultraviolet. The queen scale gives us buff flecked silver white. The prince scale gives us light translucent pinkish brown. And the princess scale gives us stone color. Okay, Now, all that means is that there's 4 different colors associated with the moon card. So Ithell Colquhoun in 1977 produces a whole tarot that's based on these key scales of color. So if we take those 4 colors, the crimson right in the center, then you have that buff flex silver white, then you have, was it translucent pink on the next one, and then stone color on the outside. So those 4 colors are each represented in this card. Okay, so we have these four key scales of color just here. Now, what they represent isn't necessarily important in terms of my work, although it's one way of interpreting the work. So if we move on to sort of a piece of work that I've done, is that this is a painting that I did last year. And what we have is that the colors become really important in terms of how you interpret that work. So it's called From Kether to Malkuth, Inspiration Descends on the Breeze of Mercury's Heels. So what I'm interested in this is where your eye moves as you look at this piece of work. So wherever the eye moves is that starts to become the color that becomes the first color that you're looking at, that's inspired you to look at this picture. So the colors become important because we can relate them back to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Kabbalah, these key scales of color. And through that, we can start to interpret them through tarot cards. So each painting can be interpreted via the tarot if we choose to. But there's also something else that's interesting about this work, and certainly the work of the Surrealists that sort of feeds into my work, is that we have this idea of automatic processes. So one of the interesting things is that when I produce work, I use automatic processes. And I think that's sort of common to both myself, to Kate, and to Julian. But each of the work that we produce is different. And it's very interesting looking at these automatic processes. I assume people are familiar with automatic processes, automatic drawing, automatic painting, automatic writing, where you're consciously not in control of what is being written or painted or drawn. Okay, so it's almost like we're trying to move out of the way to let something else come in to control the pencil, to control the pen, to control the paintbrush. And what's interesting is that the language that we use around that determines how we perceive the thing that's coming in to take over the control. So for example, you know, on one set of language, if we're talking in magical language or mediumistic language, we might say that a spirit is coming in to take control of that paintbrush while I'm doing the painting, so that it's doing the painting for me. It's not necessarily me that's doing the painting. It's that the spirit that's coming into me is doing the painting. Now, if I wanted to change the language about that, I could easily use sort of Jungian Freudian language, so the language of psychoanalysis, and say that it's my unconscious. It's my unconscious that's coming in and doing the painting or the drawing for me. What's interesting about that is how that's framed and how that's legitimized. So what's interesting from my point of view is that if I use Jungian language and say that it's my unconscious that I'm revealing when I'm doing my painting, is that somehow it becomes more legitimized for the art world than if I'm saying a spirit's coming in and taking control of that paintbrush and using that as a means to communicate with the outside world. So for me, that's really interesting. And so I'm sort of sitting on the fence with that. I think we can use both sets of language to describe the same process. And the same process is what we'd call automatic processes. Okay. So that's where I stand with that. I'd be interested to see what other people think. I'd be really interested to sort of have a discussion around this. And this is what either makes it mediumistic art or surrealist art, because what I would say with surrealism is that surrealism is couched within the context of the unconscious and the sort of psychoanalysis. And And so what the surrealists are trying to do as a branch of abstraction is essentially trying to make the unconscious visible, which is why people like Dali, people like Max Ernst, people like Breton were really interested with things like dreams and dream imagery, because they saw that as a portal or a gateway through which they could make the unconscious visible in this world, okay, through their writing, through their painting. Whenever we're talking about these automatic processes, there's sort of two parts to that. There's the creation of the work, the image creation of the work, which is, you know, you're releasing control, you're allowing something to come in, and that's taking sort of a certain amount of control over the paintbrush or over the pen. But then there's also a second part to that, and I would say there's a second part to that, which is interpretation. And the interpretation, there are several ways that we can think about interpretation of these images, okay, whatever's created via these sort of automatic processes. The first one that I want to refer to is Roberto Matta. Roberto Matta was a surrealist from the sort of 1920s through to the sort of mid 20th century. And he came up with this idea called psychological morphology. Okay, so psychological morphology is essentially like cloud spotting. You know, when you look at a cloud, and the longer you look at the cloud, the more it starts to look like Elvis, or it looks like a horse, or it looks like, you know, something starts to appear in the cloud. It looks like an angel. It might look like a spirit form. It might look like a landscape. Something starts to come through. And so he coined this term psychological morphology for that process. So when we're looking at Roberto Matta's work, and indeed when you're looking at my work or anything that's been automatically created, the longer we look at it and the slower we look at it, the more in it we'll see. And that interpretation is left to the viewer. And this is really important with my own work, is that I'm really playing with this boundary between representational art and abstraction. And it's really important for me that, because what I don't want to do is do, you know, I've just been to sort of Medicine Festival this last weekend, and the visionary art that's on display at the Medicine Festival, to a great extent, not completely, but to a great extent, is it's about somebody externalizing their visionary experience. Okay, so you have your visionary experience and you want to paint that visionary experience. For me, this is something, my work is something different, is that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go to various different points in the landscape. So I'm going to various different points in nature and opening myself to that natural spirit of place that's there, and then trying to open myself enough for that spirit of place to have a voice so it can communicate to us as human beings. So for me, it's really important that I don't interpret the work for you, because if I interpret the work for you, it sort of cuts it off for you and it'll deaden it. You know, if I say that, you know, a certain painting is a picture of, I don't know, an elephant or something, it's like suddenly that cuts it off for the viewer and it'll deaden it. So it's a bit like saying, you know, don't think of pink elephants. The first thing you think of is pink elephants. If I say it's an elephant, you'll immediately see an elephant and you won't be able to get that elephant out of your head. So with the work, it's really important that I don't give any sort of interpretation in terms of what they are. So I started to go to different locations and asking particular questions. So a lot of the work is around me asking particular questions. So the titles of the pieces are essentially the questions that I was asking. What comes back from that particular place isn't really a conscious process for me. It's an unconscious process, or it's a contacting the spirit world, in much as I want that space, I want that place to have a voice and to communicate through the paintbrush. So when you look at the work, and I have to say, it's really difficult digitally to look at this work. I would definitely recommend you come down and see it at the show, because What you don't get is the detail. Zooming into particular spots within the paintings will reveal a whole new landscape. And this idea of slowly looking at the pieces of work is really important, because the more we look, the more we see. And the slower we look, the more that will be revealed to us. It's certainly been my experience when looking at these pieces of work after they've been created, is that the more I look, the more I see. And I have to say as well, there's something around entering into the gallery space in an altered state of consciousness. Now, whether that's through meditation, it might be through drumming, it might be through any other means you can sort of think of in terms of entering an altered state of consciousness. But seeing these pieces of work in an altered state of consciousness will open you up more to the communication of whatever is trying to be communicated to you. So I have to say that to you. Okay, so this is one particular work that I've been working on this year. This will be in the show. So it's probably, I'm trying to think dimensions wise, it's probably about 75 centimeters by 50, something like that. And then we come to the interpretation. So that piece of work that we've just seen, so what I could do is that I can, I wonder if I can go back. So what we can do is, what I'm interested in is, I was talking about the movement of the eye as we look at this. So for me, the movement of the eye is from right to left. Okay. As we look at this piece of work, it's from right to left. So what I'm going to do is pick out each of the colors I can see from right to left. And then from that, I can interpret it by slow looking, psychological morphology, but I can also do an extra layer of this. So what I can also do is come up with a tarot spread for each painting. So via the key scales of color. So what I do is start off on the right with deep blue-green. And as I move from right to left, is that these are the colors that I've picked out. Now, through using the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and Ithel Colquhoun's tarot, if I choose to use a tarot, I can then come up with the key scale numbers via the colors, key scale numbers, and then a tarot spread. Okay. So the tarot spread can then also be part of the communication from the spirit of that place to whatever, to the audience in some way. Now, what's interesting about this is even if we all come up with the same tarot spread, we might all interpret that differently. And that's absolutely where I'm at. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to give this as a sort of technique, really, of viewing artwork, and particularly Ithel Colquhoun's artwork. I mean, I have to say, even her earlier pieces, which are much more representational than those sort of abstract tarot cards that we saw, is that you can look at her work and interpret them in this way by using these key scales of color and then coming with the tarot spread. So, so this is another painting that's going to be in the show as well. I'm just very aware that I just want to get a time check from someone. How am I blabbering on too much? How are we doing for time?
Yeah, it's 7:25. So I think you've been talking about 15 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you. So yeah, so this is another painting that's going to be in the show as well. I'm not going to put any interpretation on these paintings. The next 3 slides are simply paintings that are going to be in the show. And so obviously for all the reasons that I've just said, I don't want to interpret them, and I don't want to come up with interpretations for you of what these paintings are. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about why I also wanted to do this work. My work for the past sort of 15 years has been about environmentalism, and it's been one of not direct action. I've got many friends and I have been involved in direct action in terms of environmentalism in the past. But what I'm really interested in is this non-engagement with political processes, and how can artists help sort of climate change and ecocide and what we're actually facing at the moment in terms of the most important questions of our time. How can we engage with that, but not engaging politically? Because I think that's being done already. And also there's another way that we can engage with people. And it's been about deepening people's relationship with nature. The more that we have a relationship with nature, a very practical based relationship with nature, the more that nature can have a voice in terms of what we should be doing in terms of being able to help ourselves. And a lot of this work initially was me going, oh, nature, we need help. What do we need to do? And in the end, what I've ended up with is a series of work called this Miriyama work, which is basically about going to nature and saying, what is it you want to say? Rather than me saying, please help us, it's actually been going to nature and going, what is it you want to say? Because you need a voice and we need to be able to listen to you. And so a lot of the work in the show is going to be this Miriyama series. Miriyama cards were sort of 18th century cards where you could put these cards together in any form. So if you swap all the cards around, they'd still make a landscape, but it'd be a different landscape. And so a lot of the paintings, so there's a whole series of paintings that I've done that you can put together in a series. But what I'll do is we'll have a chat with the sort of Jackie and Tom, maybe at the College of Psychic Studies. And during the show, I'm going to invite them to swap the paintings around. So they're in a line, but they'll be read differently. So the story that we read from left to right will be a different story. And it's really about, they're just simply about going to these locations and saying to nature, what is it you want to say? What is it you want to say about to us as humanity? And whatever answer we get from that, from looking at these pictures, is going to be the answer that nature is trying to give us. A lot of them are based in Cornwall. They're not all exclusively based in Cornwall. In the show, there's going to be oil paintings. So there's going to be a series of 10 oil paintings. The bigger painting, the Cetha to Malkuth painting, and then 3 others. But then there's going to be for the first weekend only, there's going to be a series of watercolors available as well. And these are sort of, still these communications with the nature and the natural world. So all I've done for the titles of these is really put the place in which they were painted and then the date so that you can see what they are. But that's because I purposely don't want to put any sort of interpretation on them. I want people to approach them and gain their own interpretation from that, but knowing that it's a direct communication from the natural world. I think that's really important. Yeah, I think that's about all I want to say. So please, if you need to get in touch, please do. And yeah, I think we should sort of move on, and somebody else can have a chat now, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. So I'll hand the spotlight over to Julian next. So Julian, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Maria. Thank you to the College of Psychic Studies. Right, so I'm going to show you some stuff. Hopefully we can see this. This is the lamen that was designed for the Order of the Sun and Moon that Greg was explaining so elegantly earlier on. I am a member of a thing called the Western magical tradition, or Western esoteric tradition. That's what academics call it these days. That's a tradition of magical practice which dates back to ancient Egypt. There's a lovely lecture by Professor Ronald Hutton on that story. It basically dates from the days when the ancient Egyptian temples were taken over by the Ptolemaic dynasty. All of the priesthood, all the priests and priestesses of the temple had to go and find something else to do. So they reinvented themselves as magicians, and we are their descendants. So I would like to give honor to Tahuti, Thoth, god of writing and magic, and the daughters or consorts of Thoth. We have Sheshat, who's the goddess you can see in the center, also a goddess of writing with a 7-pointed leaf above her head, which scholars are uncertain as to what that might be. I think it might be a cannabis plant. I sometimes use cannabis as part of my practice. I've got a licensed prescription for it these days, so that's okay. But also got the goddess Mart, goddess of truth and justice. I want to just mention these important figures for me before we dive into some of the story of my work. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I got to go down to Barbara Hepworth's garden down in Cornwall. And what I previously understood as kind of nice big lumpy kind of stone things with holes in, I suddenly understood at a completely different level once I'd been to her garden and understood part of her backstory. So hopefully this will make a bit of sense about the work that I'm going to be showing at the college. So here's me. I lived and grew up in a place called Stevenage in Hertfordshire, a little bit north of London, which, as you can see, is according to the local signage, where imagination takes hold. I was fascinated by the occult from as long as I can remember. I got involved in a Wiccan coven when I'm 16. That's me on the left-hand side as I emerged into the wonderful world of being an art student back in the day of Zig Zig Sputnik and around about the kind of time of the Sisters of Mercy. And there's me in the center as I emerged from the college to go and find myself a job as a graphic designer, which is what I did. Over there on the right-hand side, this is me many years later at the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle, Cornwall, being their magician in residence, continuing the tradition that goes all the way back to those ancient days. How exciting, I hear you say. So the stuff that really appeals to me and the kind of work that I do, I'm really interested in the iconography and the symbolism of magic. That's my kind of real passion. But I'm also interested in the occultness of this. So Greg was talking about not wanting to give interpretation. And a lot of my work is kind of rooting in those ideas as well. So here are a couple of illustrations from some grimoires. So the grimoire traditions are the tradition of magical books. It goes through the medieval and into the early modern when these things start getting printed. Over on the right-hand side, you can see a page from the Key of Solomon, or an adaptation from the Key of Solomon. These are the kind of things that I really, really adored when I was a young person. I spent a lot of time in the local library, discovered there was a thing called interlibrary loan. I copied out vast numbers of these kinds of symbols, intrigued and fascinated by their magical meaning. Over here on the left-hand side, what you're seeing there is a much later, probably late 18th, 19th century grimoire from the northern climes. So this is kind of runes meets the Key of Solomon kind of mashed up together. And this is an important part of the occult magical tradition, is that we talk about things like tradition, but tradition is about keeping the fire alive, not worshipping the ashes, in the words of Gustav Mahler. And so these things, these symbols are continuously changing, continuously morphing in terms of their meaning. And that feeds a lot into the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. So an important part of this process for me was an engagement with a style of occulture that evolved in the latter part of the 20th century in Europe. And that's a thing called chaos magic. So chaos magic was a style that is most notably associated with Peter J. Carroll and a magical organization called the Magical Pact of the Illuminates Thanateros, which, if you get it in Scrabble, is a triple word score. So one of the ancestors, if you like, of this magical current as an occultist artist, Austin Osman Spare. And you can see a really rather beautiful example of one of the pieces by Spare over there on the right-hand side. So this kind of mashup of Mesopotamian, ancient Egyptian, self-portraiture, and these weird-looking monogram-type symbols. These are classically what we think of as sigils. So a sigil is that actually comes from, its origin is the same as the word seal. And those early grimoires had lots of seals in them, lots of images, which were the kind of the logos, if you like, the branding of the various kind of spirits that you could evoke if you happened to have one of these books, and several months and a lot of money to hand so you could create all the paraphernalia necessary to do the ceremony. So those sigils over there on the left-hand side of the screen, the ones at the bottom, they are from a book called the Goetia, the Lesser Key of Solomon. And each one of those represents a spirit or a demon. They're the call signs for these beings. But Austin Osman Spare kind of developed this idea in terms of these kind of more abstract monograms, the ones you can see at the top of the left-hand side. This is a technique which I'm sure many people on this call are familiar with, where essentially you write down your intention, and then you go through a process of amending the letters, maybe editing some letters out, so that you can create a monogram, so you can create an abstract symbol. And the notion that Spare was interested in is that the abstract symbol encoded the intention, but did not explicitly remind you of what that intention was. So this is the kind of stuff that I really like. Now, there's an idea in structuralism that the sign and the signifier are arbitrary. It doesn't really, there's no relationship between the characters DOG and the popular domesticated canine. However, that's not quite true, because if you have a look at these two symbols, one of these is called Booba and one of these is called Kiki. And generally speaking, most people will suggest that Booba is probably the one on the left and Kiki is the one on the right-hand side. This is cross-cultural, cross-linguistic. And so this kind of leans into this idea that shape and sound have this relationship, and that this relationship is something that seems to be cross-cultural and deeply embedded into our kind of human nature. So I'm interested in playing with that as well. What do the shapes that we make, what do the marks that we make, how do they feel, how might they sound? As a graphic designer, which was my first inclination when I left college, and as someone who then subsequently worked in lots of museums and galleries, very interested in how we present information, and particularly things like fonts and typography. You can see, obviously, the way that we choose to write something reflects a lot about another layer in the meaning of what we write. There's a lovely example. I will always find you takes on a slightly different tone if we decide to use a slightly different font. So one of the things I'm interested in is this idea of writing. I'm very, very interested in writing. That's a lot of what I do. And I'm interested in how we see writing, and we can encounter writing in different spaces. So over here on the left-hand side, this is something I found fairly recently. So this is a worm sign. So this is a worm that's eaten its way through the outer casing, the bark of a fallen tree. And if you look at that, it's not hard to imagine that perhaps we're seeing some kind of alien text. We're seeing something that suggests that it has a meaning, and yet the meaning is occluded from us, it's hidden from us. When I started exploring magic, because I absorbed all the iconography of it at a fairly young age, what started being interesting to me was actually the symbols that I didn't know, the symbols I couldn't decode. Same when we look at things like a collection of trees, for example. People often talk about, when they look at writing like the runes, how you can see perhaps in the angle between the pieces of the branches and the twigs, maybe letter forms form in that. And perhaps letter forms could be seen in the fire. If we look at those glowing logs and we look at the shapes being traced by the flame, perhaps there is something that can be decoded, that can be read in that. And of course, a lot of this is about, as that image down at the bottom right-hand side indicates, it's about playing with the optical center. It's about playing with our sense of vision. One of the ways that we can play with our vision very successfully and very interestingly is to take psychedelic drugs. So these are two pieces of lovely examples of artwork that explores the idea of the kinds of symbols that people encounter in psychedelic states. This is particularly notable in states involving doses of N,N-dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Now, DMT can be taken exogenously. You can take a potion of it. Ayahuasca is the most well-known example. But you can also stimulate these kinds of senses by other trance induction kind of techniques and ways of changing awareness. And the discovery in those spaces of strange alien language is incredibly common. So a friend of mine who was involved recently in a piece of research at Imperial College was given DMT and had a fantastic interaction with two psychedelic chinchilla who communicated with him through a visual language that he could as yet not understand. And that experience, weird though it sounds, is actually remarkably common in these kinds of settings. So I'm interested in writing. I'm interested in how writing suggests something that maybe has some kind of meaning behind it, but the meaning itself is something that's perhaps not explicit, something we have to decode, that we have to make sense of ourselves. Another example of that kind of stuff is a couple of artists' work where we've got instances of what's called asemic writing. So writing that doesn't have a meaning. Anyone who's spent any time looking at things like hip hop tags has seen things that perhaps are a little bit like this, or techniques of automatic spiritist kind of writing, where we maybe have to decode the text after it's kind of come through us, very much in the same way that Greg was talking about with the work he's doing in relation to color. So here's a piece of my work. This is one of the pieces that's going to be on show at the College of Psychic Studies, The Garland of Letters. One of the things that I like when I create pieces of work is I often have, they often point towards technique. So because there's this non-arbitrary relationship between shape and sound, a lot of the kind of circles of letters that I produce, the idea is you could use them as a spell casting mechanism. So what you do is you chant the letters as you see them in the moment that you encounter them, and you use that to create a trance induction process, and then that can be used to perhaps charge or liberate an intention, perhaps send it through the center of the garland of letters. So we would use this, we would stand in front of this piece, and we would, however we decode the letters for ourselves in that moment, make the sounds and repeat that process until we get into this altered state of awareness. Here's something else that I produce. So this is also on show at the college. These are 2 boxes that contain roots taken from a very, very large oak tree. The tree had fallen in a great storm, and I decided that I would take a couple of the roots and I would make these magical boxes for them. I did this as part of my preparation for going to Imperial College and being an experimental participant and being given this psychedelic that I mentioned, DMT, intravenously for an hour. So that was quite exciting. And part of this process was to think about creating like an anchor for myself for this intense experience. How would I feel myself rooted in the earth? And that's what the purpose of this series of 2 boxes was about. Like I say, I like to play with objects. I like to try and see if I can find the writing that's within the object. I try and see whether or not I can kind of suggest that there is text to be found in these. This is an example of a skull there, an example here of 2 stones from a local beach. These are the kind of stones that you can use actually in things like psychedelic ceremony. These are sometimes used to kind of place on people's bodies or move over them to kind of change energy patterns in a psychedelic kind of practice. And again, picking up this idea of writing. Is it writing? What does it say? How do I make sense of it? And that evocation of the mystery is what interests me. I'm also very interested in diagrams. Greg showed a picture of the Hermetic Kabbalah, the classic diagram that we have of the Kabbalah that goes into the Western magical tradition, the sort of Lucraic Kabbalah, 10 balls and 22 sticks. This is a piece that I did. Very often what I'll do is I'll kind of, enter, let's call it a meditative state, and tune in to a particular flavor of energy, if you like. So this is that kind of Kenneth Grant, Night Side of Eden, Michael Bertio, the idea of programming an astral machine. This is perhaps some strange diagram for being able to set intentions into the astral realm. This is something similar, but in relation to witchcraft, in relation to the various kind of ideas about witchcraft. So there's Wicca, there's the cultus sabbatai, there's hedge witchcraft, there's all different kinds of flavors. Again, this is me exploring those ideas and the relationship between those ideas. I think there's a little bit of a folk horror vibe going on here as well. If you look towards the bottom of the piece on the bottom right, I think that's probably an electricity pylon or something. Maybe if I was watching Children of the Stones on rerun, something like that anyhow. So this is the kind of work that I like doing. Mostly at the moment, this is all kind of black and white stuff. There are a few bits of color floating around, and there will be more of that in the show in February, which will have quite different work. A lot of the stuff I'm showing in the College of Psychic Studies is relatively small because we have a lovely room that we're using. Greg gets one wall, Kate gets the other one, and I get the one that's got the giant bookcase on it. And so what I've done is I've put lots and lots of little interesting things like that skull, like those stones in there, partly as a kind of homage to my background of 20 years working in museums and galleries and heritage locations. This one you can hardly even see. Most of the time, a lot of this work is black on black, none more black. There's the goth boy from art school. So this is a piece which again is kind of about alchemy. There's a little piece of LSD blotter, untreated of course, showing a picture of the sun and the moon. This is from a classic piece of blotter. There's a lovely book just come out by a guy called Eric Davis called Blotter, which is about the history of this very, very interesting piece of kind of underground art form. Then there's representational stuff that's more like pictures of people doing things. So this is a stylized image of the idea of psychedelic sitting. So we have somebody who's being the companion of someone who's traveling in a psychedelic journey. Maybe there's some mushrooms there, maybe there's a drum or something going on. But again, what I'm trying to play with is, if you look at the kind of cloud that's coming from the top of the image, are there faces in that? Are there meant to be faces in that? Would you see faces in that if you were tripping? That's the kind of stuff that sort of boundary between, or that uncertainty around this idea of interpretation is what really works for me. Another piece based on kind of Kenneth Grant's work, but a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in is, I'm very interested in the moon, feminine power. I'm very interested in the dark and the chthonic. Again, there's that goth boy from college again. That's the stuff that really kind of works for me at the moment. Here's a piece, Black Mirror. This is quite small. It's quite hard to take a photograph of. It's on a piece of acrylic. And the idea is that, I wanted to put some acrylic in the show because having worked in museums, I spent an awful lot of my time bending, snapping, and accidentally breaking pieces of acrylic. It's something that gets used a lot in that sector. And I'm very interested in this idea of having a black space that you can kind of look through. So you're kind of looking through the artwork, you're looking through this, and you're using it in the way that you might use a scrying surface of some description, kind of magical surface, in order for you to be able to enter a trance state, go into this kind of other world. Here's another little piece. I did a couple of pieces, one for the sun and one for the moon. Similar kind of idea here. I mean, what I'm interested in very often, although I'm interested in writing, I'm also interested a lot in free-form line. How will this appear in this moment? How does this work need to be in the time that I create it? I work usually relatively quickly, partly because I'm in this kind of altered state of consciousness. And I also work, as you can probably just about see on these images, there's a lot of layers in this. So here you can see the gold quite easily, you can see some of the black, but very often there'll be graphite lines, there'll be lots of very, very fine lines here. And again, if you've taken psychedelics or been in a profoundly altered state of consciousness, one of the things that you probably know is that the floating of kind of different visual fields and changes in contrast is an important part of how those experiences can affect the visual system of the brain. So that's something that I play with a lot of this kind of work. And a final piece here to bring us to our conclusion. Another piece of, let's call it asemic writing, inspired magical writing. And I've done this on a slate, like a couple of the other pieces. There's a whole tradition in spiritualism, early spiritualism, of having spirits write on slates. And so I wanted to kind of, again, nod towards that, because we have this lovely opportunity to bring our work into the College of Psychic Studies. And I'm very pleased that our work is being shown, but if you've never been to the College of Psychic Studies, please, please go. They have the most amazing art collection, covering all kinds of esoteric art, from the representational to the very abstract. They've lent stuff to the Venice Biennale recently, and it's a real delight to be able to bring my spirit writing, our work, into that magical space. Oh, and I'm done.
Great, thank you, Julian. So I'll hand the spotlight over to our final speaker, Kate, and then we'll have questions after Kate's portion. So whenever you're ready, Kate, go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you, Greg and Julian and Maria and the College of Psychic Studies. So these are the 9 paintings that I'm going to be showing at the college in this exhibition. And my work sits as a cluster of fragments, so paintings, rituals, spells, and I think they sit in a web of magic, alchemy, mysticism, spirituality, Jungian, Lacanian, Etagerian, psychoanalysis as well. I think that in this net, my work and I actually feel a kind of relief in being able to be what we want to be. Greg spoke about the art world, and I think for me, locating my work in this net enables me to be what I am and what my work is. And I think we've found, my work and I, the place, and the encouragement to be able to unfold into our own selves. So these paintings that I'm showing, I think are something to do with the soul, the spirit, the body, the psyche, painting its own transformation. And these paintings, like other bodies of work that I've made recently, seem to be concerned with the relationship between the moon and the sun. And this is something that I have been interested in for a long time, this transformational dance between lunar and solar consciousnesses and the unconscious. And whereas previous work that I've made, recent previous work, seemed to have an emphasis on maybe the green landscape of West Penwith in Cornwall, with otherworldly creatures laying upon and within the earth, this new body of work feels to me as though it's exploring something, again, to me, which feels more mysterious and shrouded. In this work, I can recognize wombs, placentas, fetal shapes, as in the other paintings, as in a lot of my work. But here, they seem to exist in a landscape maybe of nowhere, and at dusk and dawn, almost at a threshold. I was 16 when I began to formally study painting, and for many years, and it still happens, I stumbled around with my work without being able to see what I was doing. And I think I was unfamiliar and untrusting of a state of non-knowing. I wasn't comfortable being in a state of non-knowing, which has taken a long time for me to accept and become familiar with. So, and so I'd often wander away lost from the work, but always plodded on, and found my way back, even if it took quite a while. And in a way, it felt almost like a devotion to this thing, to the painting and my other kind of work, but to this thing I am trying to get to. And in that acceptance of the non-knowing, strangely kind of patterns and forms began to emerge. And I have always, since being a child, had an ability to slip into other worlds, into maybe what I like to think of as kind of a cosmic web of interconnected psyches. And as a child, and still, but more as a child, I experienced a kind of telepathic link to strangers and animals and plants, where I would really, really deeply feel other people's pain, so I could feel it in my own body, and their distress and their joy as well, which was good. So I was raised as a Catholic, and loved the stories of the saints, and spent much of my childhood hoping for spiritual visions. I don't think I ever had any. And again, slipping into daydreams and reveries. And I had severe asthma as a child, and there was when I was trying to recover, I had to be very still, and I spent a lot of time by myself. And I think that situation, those conditions, kind of nurtured a contemplative aspect to my life. And I spent a lot of time, because I couldn't really, I was so pathetic, couldn't really run around a lot, I had to be still. So I spent a lot of time drawing and painting and thinking and imagining and slipping into these other worlds. And I do continue to do this, and to nurture my imagination and receive guidance from other worlds. I do give attention to dreams, extending and amplifying them through Jung's technique of active imagination. I work with some breathing techniques and meditation. I make images through automatic and receptive techniques, Parsonage to Calcomania. And I work with planchettes. In my canvases, in these canvases, the shapes and other work, the shapes and these forms are those that re-emerge from my dreams in a kind of roundabout way. And these shapes and forms are those that I sense in my body, in my organs, in my psyche. Some say all of those are the unconscious, in the landscape, and also in this mysterious cosmic psychic net of connected psyches. And these shapes and forms, when I sense them, are shrouded and invisible. I don't see them. It's not that I have a visual of them and then I paint them. I don't see them at all, but feel them very deeply, and then attempt to bring those feelings and sensations that I know are shapes, colours, but I can't see them, onto the canvas. And so I do this partly by opening myself to the shapes and forms, to listen to them, how they might be unfolding through time, in kind of linear and non-linear time. So over the last few years, I've been studying with a group of women a series of 16th century woodcuts. And these woodcuts, I think, have seeped again in a roundabout way into my paintings. And woodcuts were produced to accompany an anthology of writing on alchemy called the Rosarium Philosophorum, the Rosary or Rose Garden of the Philosophers. There are 20 woodcuts, and these are symbolic images relating to the dance or the relation between Luna and Sol. And Luna and Sol are connected to other symbols and personifications, such as the moon and the sun, the queen and the king, white and red, the unconscious and conscious aspects of the psyche, lunar consciousness, solar consciousness. And of course, alchemical symbols never refer just to one thing. They're not like a sign. Each symbol is multi-layered, and it can't ever be pinned down. So I guess if I say that these woodcuts follow the transformation of both Luna and Sol until they find a kind of balance between them, then that is an oversimplification. It's not quite right either, but it gives an idea. And it's this dance between Luna and Sol that I find absolutely fascinating, and which is the aspect I think emerges in my paintings. So this piece, Sun and Moon Proffer Roses. So all of these paintings have been were made this year. And almost always I paint directly from the unconscious. Going on what Greg said, I think there's a question about, okay, what is the unconscious? And then that can go on forever, what that is. I'd say from the unconscious, from other worlds as well. and my paintings emerge slowly on the canvas. There's a lot of overpainting, and I begin and carry on making the painting by trying to feel the invisible forms, edges, and it feels like I'm in this dusky cave of non-knowing as I'm painting them. And I paint in a way that encourages psychic material, wherever it comes from, to seep into being. So what emerges on the canvas is unknown to my conscious mind. So when I look at them, to an extent, it's as if I'm looking at them for the first time, as if they're not my paintings. But there is a very slow contemplation that I undertake. And then there is like an encounter, I think I would describe it, between aspects of me and aspects of the painting. And the things that emerge that through that encounter, that's what guides me and feeds back into the work. Sometimes things filter up into words, and titles of the paintings are the first kind of thing that filters up into words, and the titles come intuitively to me, and they really help me have some kind of if I say understanding, that's not quite accurate, but insight maybe into what's going on. So the title of this painting refers to the beginning of the Rosarium Philosophorum, where Sol and Luna, conscious and unconscious, first meet each other. And in that image in the center, they're there proffering double-headed roses, some say lilies as well, in their left hands. And I know left-handedness can mean all sorts of things. To me, in this context, it means Sol and Luna are journeying into other worlds, into the unconscious, into the cosmos. That's the route they're taking, not a conscious route. And in this painting, it feels to me as though some of the contents of the unconscious are finding form in that sliver. So just a spark in the conscious realm, in that yellow loop. And possibly that thick pink line marks a threshold, possibly between the two realms of the conscious spirit world of the blue and the unconscious in the earth beneath. Most of the activities going on beneath the line where two forms touch, but not quite. And they're separated, I think, by maybe another threshold here, this lilac threshold. So this green on the left, the lighter green, perhaps references the earth, visible layer of the earth, and this here is maybe a deeper layer, and it could be indicative of a deeper layer within the body, within the psyche. And these two don't connect, that there is this threshold between them. In this painting, fertilizations, my paintings are infused with an awareness, I think, of transformation. That's really important to me. In the movement between lightness and darkness, and the interplay between Sol and Luna through the calendar year, through cycles of Irish mythology, Celtic festivals, and with attention to calendrical symbols, and some are alchemical, like firing, decay, decomposition, stillness and lying fallow, sexual union, gestation, birth, growth, flowering, fruiting, and then fading again. And I'm interested in how calendrical symbols and the movements of dark and light are mapped in the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. I'm interested in alchemy and its concepts, its operations, I'm interested in the connections between Carl Jung's work on alchemy and his theory of individuation, the psyche's movement towards becoming its fully rounded self. I'm interested in Jacques Lacan's articulation of interweaving registers of the psyche and Jean Gebser's work on structures of the of consciousness. I'm just beginning to spend some time with that. I'm interested in contemporary artist and psychoanalyst Bracha Ettinger's matrix theory, and this really underpins a lot of my work, that proposes that we consider the relation between becoming mother and becoming infant in the very latest stages of pregnancy as the most archaic structure of becoming. And I'm interested in how this really radical theory, I think, crosses a threshold into another world, into another way of encountering the other. And I'm interested in this matrixial relation, its connection to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' dialectical materialism. And in fact, I think Karl Marx thinks alchemically. I really, really think he does. I'm interested in new organizational forms like the distributed network and matrix theory as a pre-organizational form. And I'm interested in them all because they seem to circumambulate around a mystery, something hidden, out of sight, unknown, invisible. And they make suggestions as to what might be at the core of these mysteries, hints and suggestions. And interesting and really importantly for me, they also seem to offer patterns and structures, methods, concepts that help in the search for these or mysteries or the mystery. And I'm interested in all because they seem connected together in my cosmology and important to me, and they're kind of like loops and holes of crochet. And I'm interested in them all because I think I paint in relation to mystery and in relation to the search for mystery. And in this painting, the double-headed roses appear along with the dove, the spirit from the rosarium. And I actually painted those quite consciously. I don't usually do that. And then straight from the unconscious, this fetal horse or whatever it is emerged very quickly. If it's not a horse, I think it may, in case, be a symbol of the masculine. Below the earth, a womb-like space, maybe with a crescent moon and two circular forms. And the three roses link to the dove, the moon, and the horse. The dove and the horse above ground and the moon below. I experienced mystery, obviously, that's something invisible to me, unknowable, almost unknowable that I can't directly touch, but which I feel and sense deeply. And as I said, the shapes and forms that I paint are those that re-emerge from dreams, from those which I sense in my body. And I attempt to bring them onto the canvas. And it's like in a state, and I do this in a state of, to use a term from Bracha Ettinger, of fragilization. So it's like fragments from me dance around fragments from elsewhere, from other worlds, from others, and the painting, and this becomes an encounter, a mutual transformation. In this painting, it seems that the earth, the land is opening up, it's being peeled back, it's lifting into the sky, and it felt very, very odd when I painted it. It felt like I'd crossed a threshold into something either that I shouldn't have done or something sacred. It was a very odd feeling. Two white orbs, maybe moons, coming to meet each other. And this landscape feels very silent to me, with just a hint of sound emerging. And I think the almost silence continues into this painting, and it feels to me like a sacred innermost space. It may be a close-up of the previous painting, and the moon sits at the bottom here, at the, in the core of the sun. And their light allows these little shadows here to emerge. In the Rosarium, both Sol and Luna, masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche, undergo transformation. And I think that maybe that's something that's happening here. Maybe the lunar cluster below is undergoing transformation, because there are leaves coming out there. It feels like the moon's moving, shifting. There's a lunar trail that's partially separated from the orb. And the sun at the top holds a yellowed moon at its core. And the moon at the bottom holds a softened, mellow sun at its core. And it feels to me as though Sol, the sun's bowing his head to Luna, holding her quite literally within him. Maybe the pink is a protective threshold. And I wonder if it suggests that for Sol, Luna is the mystery around which he circumambulates. In this painting, the sun seems to be sinking into the earth womb, ready for transformation. So perhaps now the sun is being transformed, and the lunar orb lights the sky. The magenta placenta, as I see it, connects with the sky spirit womb and its contents, and they hover maybe protectively over the sun, holding him. I'm just aware of time. I'm going to speed up a bit. In alchemy, the soul bridges builds the bridge between the spirit and the body. And it just occurs to me that maybe something like that is going on in this painting. The green earth, the body on the right, connects by means of loops and strands to the spirit womb on the left. I think maybe that the forms, the shapes, the colours in my work hover at the threshold of the symbolic. And yeah, I'll just go on to the next one. The things that I paint emerge from this shrouded, hidden place, the mysteries around which I circumambulate. And my encounters with the mysteries and the circumambulation around it are my work. It's what drives me to make work, and what drives me or encourages me to keep inhabiting this dusk-like space of the unknown. Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you so much. So let me get all three of you up here. I've lost Greg. There he is. Okay, so thank you so much, guys. That was absolutely amazing. A feast for the eyes and the mind and the soul. So I've had a few questions come in, and I'll just read them out. I think the first one was for Greg, actually. Let me find it. Yes, this person says, "Hi, Greg. Curious to know whether in your process you start with an instinctual response to the colors and interpret later, or to what extent you are aware of the correspondences as you paint."
I can't, well, I basically choose colors at random. That's the easy answer. The easy answer is that I go to these locations, close my eyes, choose colors at random, and then do that. So it's an unconscious process. Although there is, like, the Kether to Malkuth one was conscious. It's like, but it's almost like I think that was a stage on the journey. Certainly the connections with nature, they're unconscious. It's like, it's whatever colors come through, and then they're open for interpretation afterwards. You know, I class that as a large part of the communication. So yeah, thank you. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. And then this question is for whoever wants to answer, I suppose. So they say, The art exhibition that you've created seems to have a sacred, unfiltered inner eye that radiates a vision of our being into the realm of the present. I love the techniques and invention that all the speakers have implemented, and I'm sure that the physical space of the college will help viewers to connect. My question is, Eiffel would have been in a similar position to yourselves. Can you explain what type of belief it takes to create such art?
Do either of you want to answer that? I don't want to hog the microphone, so I'm happy for somebody else to talk.
Julian or Kate, any thoughts on that one?
Well, I think what a fantastic, a very beautiful description. So thank you for those words that I think apply to lots of artists working in this way. Did you say the questions about belief in?
I'll read the question part again. They say, Eiffel would have been in a similar position to yourselves. And can you explain what type of belief it takes to create such art?
I think it's a belief. It's like there's just I'd say a belief that it's letting go of the ego, what for one thing is really helpful, and a belief that these things sit within all of us, and all that we can do, and it's a little bit we can do, is just to bring some of it out onto in whatever way we do it. That's not answering it. Somebody else can have a go.
I think there's also, there needs to be some sort of belief in an other world, however you describe it, whether it's the unconscious, whether it's there needs to be a belief in the other. It's not just all about you as an individual that is the entirety of your experience on this planet. I think there has to be a belief in something other than that. I'll be interested to see what you two think and see if you think that's right or not.
So there's another question that I spotted in the chat, which is maybe related in a way, from Joanne, which was about, if I don't believe all this stuff, will it make any sense? And the answer is, have you had dreams? Which is that a quote from Eiffel, or is that a quote from
Leonora Carrington?
Leonora Carrington, thank you.
Yeah.
If you have dreams, you have this experience of going into these weird visionary states, right? These are things that are given in human biology, and we can conceptualize them in all kinds of different ways. But the way I think about this is that magic is the technology of the imagination, and it's an approach to mystery. So all these three ways that we've seen, and all the other kind of artists that do this kind of practice, I think that there's the method, natural processes, automatic drawing, working with key cell colors, feeling a sense of a feeling, and then trying to articulate that visually. So there's the kind of the technique that we use, the technique of the imagination. So I would broadly describe that as that's what magic is. But what it's approaching is the mystery, is the occult, is the thing that can never be completely finally disclosed. So it's not antithetical to do this practice and be, for example, as the questioner says in the chat, skeptical. In fact, skepticism and scientific inquiry has its roots in the Western magical tradition. That's where the Royal Society, Sir Isaac Newton, and all that stuff comes from. Because it's not about having a predetermined understanding. Kate's work is her feeling a feeling and then trying to articulate it through, in this instance, a painting. Greg's work is feeling into a place and then exploring that with color. My work is to feel into the idea of writing and to try and create a writing that points towards something beyond a simple decoding. I think I'll stop there. Does that help?
I think that would answer the question. Yeah, and it does tie into the next question. So I'll just read it out for Kate and Greg in case you have anything to add to it, because it is worth discussing. This person says, I'm interested in art, but I have very little knowledge about magic and the subjects discussed in this presentation. Do you think I would be able to appreciate the art at this exhibition with so little experience of what the college explores? And if I do visit, do you have any suggestions about how I can approach it, even with my skeptical mind?
Shall I go first? So
Oh.
look, I'd say absolutely, but I'm going to say that, aren't I? Yes, come along, have a look at the work. But I think it's also it's designed for that. The whole point is that you don't need to know any previous knowledge of this stuff. Is that you can come along and it's about looking at it, and then what does it say to you as an individual? It's like that's what it's about, and I think that's what all these practices are about. It's about, okay, I've got this image in front of me. What is it saying to me? How does it make me feel? You know, the question isn't what is it? The question isn't necessarily, oh, is it what's Kate's interpretation of this? It's more to do with, I think, for also my work. It's like, how's this making me feel as an object of art? It's abstraction, you know. That's the classic sort of abstraction is, how does it make me feel as opposed to what does it look like? We're trying to get beyond the visual, or I'm certainly trying to get beyond the visual to get some other feeling that's going on here. What do you two think?
I think, yes, of course. It's that you don't need any understanding, I don't think, of art or of the of magic, occult to engage with the work. I think Eiffel Colquhoun said something around that if the work is made from the unconscious, then it speaks to the unconscious of the person who, I don't know if she used the word encounter, but I would, encounters it. So just being there and not not having any preconceived framework knowledge or anything is perfect. And just spend quiet time with it and just see if anything, you notice anything in the image. You can notice colors, shapes, how you feel. It might not be how you feel at all. You might get to it in a different way. But it's just that opening the possibility for something from the work and something from you that's beyond your conscious mind to start just dancing like the sun and the moon.
That was beautifully put.
Yeah, lovely. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Julian?
No, I don't think so. I think Kate summarised that eloquently. I've nothing further to add, I don't think.
Right. If there's anyone that has a question, I think we have time for one more. I don't think I've seen any others coming in. So yeah, while people are maybe typing furiously before the presentation ends, I'll just say the exhibition will be opening next Friday. If you do come on Friday, you'll get a free glass of wine. So please come along. Yeah, it's true. Come along. The artists will be there. You can speak to staff, you can enjoy the artwork, and yeah, so please come. And I also popped some links in the chat to some workshops that Kate, Julian, and Greg will be hosting. So Greg has one coming up about psychogeography, sounds really awesome. Kate has one coming up about art and alchemy, also super awesome. And then there's a ceremony, what was the name of it? A magical ceremony for our ancestors and a utopian future with all three of them. So I don't see any other questions, so I think we can wrap things up there. Do you guys have anything else you want to say before we close up?
I'll just mention, if I may, Maria, I've got a couple of other gigs that I'm doing with the College of Psychic Studies. I'm going to do an 8-week session on chaos magic for anyone who fancies that, a deep dive, as they say, into that practice over September through October. I'm doing something about ancestors and approaching death, looking at the neurology of death and what we know about that in relation to kind of different ideas about what that experience is like and what it means and how it might be understood. And then later on in November, I'm going to be doing a talk again at the college. This is all online stuff, which is about my experience of taking mind-bending psychedelic drugs for science. So I'm going to talk about my experience of taking NN-DMT intravenously. So yeah, that's just like a few things that people might want to come along to if they fancy.
I did also want to mention as well, it's another plug, but it's basically, we've got after the show at the College of Psychic Studies, there's also, we're going to be having this show down in Cornwall if people fancy traveling down to Cornwall in St. Ives. It's to coincide with the opening of the Ithell Colquhoun exhibition at Tate St. Ives. So we've got a show that's running in St. Ives for the first 2 weeks of that show, which is from the 2nd of Feb, I think.
Yes,
so 2nd of Feb to the 11th or something like that. And we're going to be doing all sorts of fun stuff. I'm building a dream machine. We're doing all sorts of stuff, man. So yeah, so come down to that. That should be fun as well. But come to the ones at College of Psychic Studies, obviously. That's the most important one, and that's what we're here to talk about. So yeah, hopefully look forward to seeing you all there. And yeah, please come down, say hi. We'll be there for opening weekend.
And thank you all for being here. Absolutely fantastic.
Really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I will echo that. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our amazing artists/presenters. So people are just quickly asking about when the opening is. It's next Friday. That's the 30th. And it starts from 6 p.m. So I think it's best if you reserve on the website. It is free, but do let us know that you're coming so that we have wine for you. Okay. So thank you so much, guys. And I look forward to seeing you and seeing your art.
Thanks very much, Maria.
Loads of love. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Ciao. Loads of love. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.